The conference room on the second floor of Schmidt Automotive AG was buzzing with excitement as CEO Katharina Schmidt, heir to a $2 billion empire, faced the biggest failure of her career, a revolutionary engine that no engineer could get to work. Sitting in front of her in her glass and steel office overlooking Munich were Europe's best engineers, who had been working on the prototype for 6 months without success. Katharina, 29 and famous for her arrogance, was on the verge of losing a $500 million contract with BMW when a cleaner knocked on the door. It was Stefan Weber, years old, a former Formula One mechanic who had fallen from grace and now cleaned offices to survive. With one look at the engine, he said, "Madam, I know what's wrong." Katharina burst out in contemptuous laughter and in front of all the executives issued the most outrageous challenge of her life. "If you can fix this engine that 12 engineers couldn't fix, I'll marry you." The room fell silent. Stefan looked her straight in the eye and replied, "Agreed." What happened in the following hours changed not only the fate of the company, but also the lives of two people whom fate had tested in the most unexpected way. The 50th floor of the Schmidt Automotive term dominated the Munich skyline like a monument to German engineering. Behind the glass walls of the most prestigious office, Katharina Schmidt, 29-year-old third-generation CEO, stared with growing frustration at the engine that threatened to destroy the empire built by her grandfather. 6 months earlier, Schmidt Automotive had signed the most important contract in its history to supply BMW with a revolutionary hybrid engine for its new hypercar series. Millions of euros were at stake, a sum that would finally cement the company's position among the global market leaders in automotive technology. The project seemed perfect on paper. The research and development team had designed a drive system that combined a traditional V12 with a state-of-the-art electric motor. The computer simulations showed exceptional performance, 1200 HP, near-zero emissions, unprecedented energy efficiency, but the reality turned out to be completely different. The prototype stubbornly refused to function properly. Every attempt to start it ended with abnormal vibrations, inexplicable overheating, and a metallic noise that made even the most experienced technicians shudder. Katharina had inherited not only wealth from the family business, but also the pride and arrogance that often accompany those born at the top. After studying mechanical engineering at the Technical University of Munich and earning her MBA at INSEAD, she was used to solving problems with money and authority, but this engine seemed immune to both. On this November morning, the second emergency meeting of the month had brought the company's best minds together in Katharina's office. 12 engineers sat around the crystal table and looked at the engine, which was displayed like a modern work of art that refused to come to life. Dr. Andreas Muller, project manager and Formula One veteran, shook his head once again. He had tried every conceivable solution: software changes, injection optimizations, cooling system improvements. Nothing worked. Katharina paced nervously behind her mahogany desk. Her heels clattered on the marble floor. Munich stretched out to the horizon beyond the panoramic windows, but she saw only the looming disaster. The BMW ultimatum was due to expire in 3 days. If the engine wasn't working by then, the company would not only lose 500 million euros, but also the reputation it had painstakingly built up over 70 years. The engineers discussed the situation with increasingly agitated voices. Some suggested starting from scratch. Others called in external consultants. Some even talked about admitting defeat. Katharina listened to them with growing irritation. At that moment of extreme tension, someone knocked on the glass door of the office. Everyone turned around in annoyance. Katharina's meetings were never interrupted. That was an ironclad company rule. But through the glass, they could see the figure of a man in gray work clothes, a cleaning cart next to him. Katharina made an angry gesture to the secretary, who was visible through the glass walls, signaling that she did not want to be disturbed. But the man knocked again, this time more insistently. He had a serious, almost urgent expression on his face that contrasted with the modesty of his position. The man did not move. He stood in front of the door with a determination that surprised everyone. Katharina, completely annoyed, went to open the door herself. Standing in front of her was a man in his 30s, tall and slim, with calloused hands that betrayed years of hard work. His dark eyes were not focused on Katharina, but on the motor in the middle of the room. He introduced himself as Stefan Weber, a cleaner working the night shift. Then, looking at the prototype, he simply said he knew what was wrong. The room exploded in collective laughter. 12 engineers with prestigious degrees couldn't solve the problem, and a cleaner claimed to have the solution. Katerina asked who he was. Stefan explained that he had been working there as a cleaner for 6 months, but that he used to work on engines. When Dr. Mueller asked ironically, where, Stefan replied that he had been chief mechanic for Scuderia Rosso Corsa in Formula One. The ensuing silence was deafening. Everyone knew Rosso Corsa, the team that had dominated the lower categories before disappearing in a financial scandal 2 years ago. The mention of Scuderia Rosso Corsa transformed the atmosphere in the room. Rosso Corsa had been a legend in the world of motorsports, a small Italian team that had challenged the international giants with brilliant innovations. Dr. Mueller, who had known some members of the team personally, became more serious. He confirmed that Stefan Weber was indeed the engineer who had developed the variable injection system for the 488 challenge. Stefan explained what had happened to him. When Rosso Corsa collapsed, he was accused of complicity in financial fraud. He was never charged. There was no evidence, but suspicion was enough. No team wanted to hire someone who had even been marginally involved in the scandal. For 2 years, he looked for work in the industry. He had sent applications to every car manufacturer in Europe, but no one would even grant him an interview. He had taken this job to survive, hoping that someone would give him a chance to prove who he really was. Katerina watched him with growing interest. There was something fascinating about this man who had lost everything but retained his dignity and competence. But she was also irritated by his presumption. Stefan approached the engine with slow, methodical movements, examining each component like a detective. After a few minutes of study, he declared that the problem was not in the design, which was brilliant, but in the assembly. Dr. Mueller protested that they had followed every specification. Stefan explained that he was not talking about mechanical tolerances, but about synchronization. The engine had 2 hearts that had to beat together, like in a symphony, but they were playing 2 different melodies. He pointed to a series of almost invisible sensors. The control parameters had been calibrated separately for each system. First the V12, then the electric motor. That was exactly what they had done, according to standard protocol. Stefan explained the error. 2 already calibrated systems could not be synchronized. They had to be calibrated together simultaneously, as if they were a single living organism. The explanation was so simple that it seemed ingenious. Katerina felt a spark of hope, but also skepticism. If the solution was so obvious, why hadn't anyone else thought of it? She said sarcastically, "Talk is cheap, but proving it is another matter." Stefan looked at her calmly. He didn't seem intimidated by her aggressiveness. He asked for a chance, 12 hours of work, and he guaranteed that the engine would sing like a Stradivarius. The room exploded with new skeptical murmurs. Katerina felt anger rising. Who was this stranger promising her results that the best team in Europe couldn't achieve? She blurted out and called him crazy. 12 graduate engineers, 6 months of work, state-of-the-art technology, and he claimed he could solve everything in one night. Stefan replied calmly. He wasn't claiming anything, he was suggesting. Katerina stared at him with growing intensity. There was something provocative about this man that awakened her competitive side. Besides, she was running out of options. In 3 days, she would have to admit failure to BMW. Then the sentence that would change everything came out, spoken in the heat of the moment. "You know what? If you really manage to repair this engine that 12 engineers couldn't repair, I'll marry you." The room fell completely silent. Everyone looked at Katerina with incredulous expressions. Stefan didn't smile. He looked her straight in the eye with absolute seriousness. "Agreed." Stefan's words hung in the air like a challenge to fate. Katerina immediately realized the madness of her actions, but it was too late to back down in front of a room full of witnesses. The engineers looked at each other with expressions ranging from amusement to embarrassment. Katerina tried to regain control by setting the rules. 12 hours from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. If the engine worked, they would honor the agreement. If not, Stefan would disappear forever. Stefan accepted the terms. He requested full access to the lab, diagnostic instruments, and technical manuals. Katerina granted them to him and specified that he would work alone without help from the team. The rest of the day passed in a surreal atmosphere. News of the bet spread quickly throughout the building. Some employees found the situation amusing, others were concerned, and many secretly placed bets on the outcome. Katerina tried to concentrate on her usual work, but her thoughts kept returning to her actions. How could she have been so impulsive? If Stefan solved the problem, she would find herself in an impossible situation. At 8 p.m., Katerina personally accompanied Stefan to the research laboratory. It was a sterile, high-tech environment full of computer-assisted diagnostic instruments. The engine was positioned on a test bench surrounded by sensors. Katerina specified that security cameras would record everything to ensure that he worked alone. Stefan looked around with the expression of someone who finally felt at home. His eyes lit up as he looked at the instruments. Before Katerina left, he asked why she had really agreed. Even if he were successful, what would it do for him? You can't really think that, Stefan interrupted her and explained that he had lost everything 2 years ago. His job, his reputation, his future. This was his only chance to prove who he really was. If he failed, he would remain in the same situation. If he succeeded, he would have proven that Stefan Weber was still worth something. Regarding the marriage, he said she would never marry someone like him, and they both knew that. But she would keep her word, that would do her credit. Katerina couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her penthouse in Schwabing, imagining what was happening in the lab. She surprised herself by hoping that Stefan would be successful, not so much because of the personal implications, as because of the poetic justice of the situation. At 5 a.m., she couldn't take it anymore. She went to the office 2 hours early. The cameras confirmed that Stefan had worked all night, completely absorbed in his work, dismantling and reassembling components with surgical precision. At 8 a.m. sharp, Katerina entered the lab, followed by the team of engineers who didn't want to miss the moment of truth. The lab looked like the scene of an epic battle between man and machine. Spreadsheets were scattered everywhere. Diagnostic instruments displayed complex graphics, and at the center of it all, the engine looked different. Not physically, but something in its presence indicated a fundamental change. Stefan stood next to the test bench, his work clothes covered in grease, his hair tousled, but his eyes shining with a light that had nothing to do with fatigue. He looked like a general who had won an impossible battle. Katerina approached, followed by the skeptical but curious team of engineers. Outer Malueller immediately leaned over the control computers and studied the parameters Stefan had entered during the night. After a few minutes, he muttered in disbelief. Stefan had completely recalibrated the mapping with algorithms Muller didn't recognize. Stefan explained that he had developed some of them during his time at Rosso Corsa to synchronize K with the main engine, and had adapted others from aviation systems. The principle was always the same: 2 power systems that had to behave like one. Katerina looked at the engine without saying anything. From the outside, it looked identical, but Stefan had the expression of someone who had performed a miracle. Do you like this story? Give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Now let's continue with the video. Katerina requested a demonstration. Stefan approached the main control panel with calm, confident movements. Before starting, he briefly explained what he had done. He had created a protocol that allowed the 2 systems to think as a single organism instead of separate entities. Muller nodded and studied the data, admitting that it should work in theory. Stefan pressed the start button. The lab filled with electronic humming, followed by the sound of a V12 engine waking up. But instead of the unpleasant vibrations and metallic noises of the past, the engine started running with a sound that was pure mechanical music. The parameters on the monitors showed perfect values: optimal temperature, consumption within limits, near zero emissions. The most extraordinary thing was the harmony between the 2 drive systems. The transition from combustion to electric motor happened without any uncertainty, as if they had been designed to work together from the outset. Katerina was speechless. The engineers crowded around the monitors, incredulous at the data. The engine that had driven them to despair for months was now performing better than the theoretical predictions. Muller whispered, "It's impossible for the parameters to be better than those predicted by the original project." Stefan explained that when 2 systems worked in perfect synchronization, the result exceeded the sum of the parts. Katerina looked at him with a mixture of admiration, disbelief, and something resembling attraction. This man had saved her company, her reputation, and a $500 million contract. He had done in 12 hours what the best team in Europe had failed to do in 6 months. But there was a huge problem that she now faced head-on. She offered her formal congratulations and confirmed that the engine was working perfectly. Stefan thanked her with professional pride mixed with something deeper. The ensuing silence was full of unspoken meanings. Everyone knew the terms of the bet and waited to see what Katerina would do. She told the engineers they had work to do, to prepare a presentation for BMW by noon. The engineers understood and left slowly, not without exchanging meaningful glances. In a few minutes, Katerina and Stefan were left alone with the engine that had changed everything. The silence in the lab was deafening. Katerina and Stefan looked at each other from opposite sides of the test bench, the engine between them as a witness to what had just happened. Katerina spoke first, acknowledging that Stefan had indeed kept his promise. She had made a promise in front of 12 witnesses. Stefan did not take advantage of the situation, but waited for her to decide how she would handle the most surreal situation of her life. Katerina began to pace around the lab. She had always solved problems with logic and determination, but this time she found herself in completely uncharted territory. She tried to frame the situation as a provocation, a joke uttered in the heat of the moment. Stefan said he understood completely and explained that she had every right to ignore what she had said. She was the CEO of a major German company. He was a former mechanic who cleaned offices. But something in Stefan's tone struck Katerina. It wasn't resentment, but a sad resignation. Katerina asked what he really wanted. Stefan looked at her intently. He wasn't so naive as to think they could really get married. She lived in a golden world 50 floors above reality, while he lived in a one-room apartment in Neuperlach and took 2 buses to work. He explained what he really wanted: public recognition for solving the problem, a position on the research team that matched his skills, and maintaining the engagement fiction long enough for him to rebuild his reputation in the industry. The proposal was rational and pragmatic, a business agreement disguised as a love story. She would save face by keeping her word. He would get the opportunity to work in the industry he loved. After a few months, they would discover that they were incompatible. Katerina studied Stefan's face, looking for cynicism, but saw despair masked as pragmatism. If she said no, he would return to cleaning offices, but he would have had the satisfaction of proving that he was still worth something as a mechanic. Katerina went to the window overlooking Munich. The city stretched out below her, full of success stories and failures, second chances, and broken dreams. For the first time, she found herself in a situation she couldn't control with money or authority. She said he was crazy, completely crazy. The media would devour them alive. The millionaire CEO and the ex-mechanic would be in the tabloids for months. Stefan replied that he thought gossip didn't scare her. Katerina admitted that it didn't scare her. It annoyed her, but she had learned to deal with it. After long minutes of consideration, weighing options she would never have imagined a few hours earlier, she made her decision. Okay, let's do it. Stefan raised his eyebrows, surprised by her quickness. Katerina laid out her conditions. First, he would become head of hybrid engine development with a 3-year contract. Second, their relationship would last exactly 6 months. Third, no one could ever find out that it was fake. And fourth, if he ever betrayed their agreement or harmed her, she would destroy him so completely that he wouldn't even be able to find work as a street sweeper. Stefan agreed. They shook hands like 2 CEOs, but when they touched, they both felt an electric shock that had nothing to do with business. The first days of the fake engagement were a comedy of errors. Katerina had underestimated how difficult it was to fake a romantic relationship with someone she hardly knew. The media pounced on the story like vultures. The CEO and the mechanic, a fairy tale love, headlined the Süddeutsche Zeitung. The tabloids invented romantic stories about how they met. Katerina had to quickly learn the details of Stefan's life in order to answer journalists' questions. She discovered that he was born in Stuttgart, the son of a mechanic and an elementary school teacher. He had studied mechanical engineering in Stuttgart and graduated with top marks before being discovered by a Formula One talent scout. Stefan had to adapt to Katerina's golden world. Dinners in Michelin-starred restaurants, social events, award ceremonies, where the presence of the couple of the moment was highly sought after. At first, he felt like an actor in a role that was too big for him, but gradually he began to relax. The turning point came 3 weeks after the start of their production. It was late in the evening and Katerina had stayed in the office to review the final contracts with BMW. The official test of the repaired engine had been an extraordinary success, exceeding all expectations. Stefan knocked on her office door around 10 p.m. He had seen the light on and wanted to make sure everything was okay. Katerina looked up and noticed for the first time how Stefan had changed in recent weeks. His clothes were neater, his hair was professionally cut, his posture was more confident, but above all, he had regained that spark of passion in his eyes. Katerina explained that she was reviewing the BMW agreement. Thanks to him, they had obtained even better terms. Stefan sat down and asked a personal question. He wanted to know why she had really agreed to his deal. She could have ignored the bet without any consequences. Katerina put down her pen thoughtfully. At first, she had done it out of pride, so as not to appear like someone who didn't keep her word. But now she thought it had been one of the best decisions of her life. Stefan had saved her, solved a problem that could have cost her everything. But above all, he had shown her that true talent had nothing to do with titles or pedigree. She got up and went to the window. In the last few weeks, she had discovered that Stefan was the most brilliant engineer she had ever met. His solutions were innovative, elegant, effective. The team revered him because he solved problems that were considered impossible. But there was something else. She liked the person she was when she was with him. Less arrogant, less sure she was always right. He challenged her in ways no one else had ever dared. Stefan approached the window. He knew it was all a pretense, just a business agreement. But in recent weeks, he had begun to forget where the fiction ended and something else began. Stefan admitted that he had also begun to forget. Their first kiss was sweet and uncertain, as if they were crossing an unknown line. When they parted, they looked at each other with new eyes. Katerina whispered that it complicated everything. Stefan admitted that it did. But perhaps the best complications were the unplanned ones. The following months were a progressive mutual discovery. Katerina learned to appreciate the simplicity that Stefan brought into her life. Dinners in neighborhood restaurants, walks in the park, real conversations instead of diplomatic small talk. Stefan discovered that behind the ruthless CEO facade, Katerina was an intelligent and passionate woman who had hidden her vulnerability behind the armor of professional success. Under Stefan's leadership, the F&I team became the most innovative in the company. His unconventional methods led to technological breakthroughs that propelled Schmidt Automotive to the top of the industry. But the biggest change was in Katerina herself. Investors noticed that she had become more cooperative, less interested in dominating, and more focused on results. The business press began to talk about a new leadership. The decisive moment came after exactly 6 months, when their original agreement expired. They were in the laboratory where it all began, looking at the engine that was now in production for BMW. Katerina noted that, technically speaking, their agreement expired that day. They were supposed to announce the separation, tell the media that they had discovered they were incompatible. They looked at each other in silence for a long time. Then Stefan smiled and said, "There's a problem." He had really fallen in love with her. Katerina felt her heart skip a beat. That was a serious problem, very serious, because she had also fallen in love with him. The second kiss was completely different from the first. There was no more uncertainty, but the certainty of two people who had found something real in the most unexpected place. A year later, Katerina and Stefan's real wedding was the social event of the year. Not only because of the romantic contrast, but because it represented something deeper, proof that love can arise in the most unexpected ways. During the celebration, Katerina gave a speech that became legendary in Munich industrial circles. "A year ago, I made the craziest bet of my life. I thought I was only risking my reputation. I didn't know I was betting on my future and my happiness. Stefan didn't just repair a broken engine. He repaired me." Stefan replied, "A year ago, I was a man who had lost everything. Katerina gave me not only a second chance at my career, but a first chance at true love. She taught me that the most impossible challenges hide the most valuable prizes." Under their joint leadership, Schmidt Automotive became one of the world leaders in innovation. But more importantly, it became an example of how true love and mutual respect can transform not just two people, but an entire organization. 5 years later, when their first child Marcus was born, the prototype repaired by Stefan still stood in Katharina's office with a plaque. Sometimes the most impossible challenges lead to the most beautiful results. The story became a legend in the industrial world, not because of its romantic aspect, but because it proved that true talent can emerge from any social class, that love can arise from the most unlikely situations, and that sometimes a bet made out of pride can turn into the most beautiful destiny imaginable. Every year on the anniversary of the challenge, Stefan started Genor to remind both of them that miracles happen when talent meets opportunity and true love when pride gives way to vulnerability. 10 years later, Schmidt-Weber Automotive, the name changed after the wedding, had revolutionized the German automotive industry. But the real revolution had been personal. Two people who learned that life's greatest challenges often turn into the most precious gifts, and that the most authentic love comes when you have the courage to bet on someone the world has underestimated. Like, if you believe that true talent can emerge from any situation, comment and tell us about a time when you underestimated someone because of their appearance. Share to honor those who never give up despite setbacks. Subscribe for more stories of comebacks that change everything. Sometimes the person who can save you is the one you ignore. Sometimes the craziest bets lead to the most beautiful results. And sometimes love arises when pride gives way to respect.